What if the world's new espounciest man alive just confessed to something that could shake both Hollywood and Buckingham Palace to their core? Picture this. Millions watching live. Jimmy Fallon grinning his signature grin, the studio lights glowing hot against velvet curtains, laughter rippling through the audience, until one sentence froze everyone in their seats. Jonathan Bailey, the charming gentleman from Bridgerton, just said something no one expected. Not the producers, not Jimmy, and certainly not Meghan Markle. It happened fast, so fast the laughter didn't even have time to die before the silence swallowed the room. Fallon blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. Bailey smiled faintly, as though he'd just dropped the world's most dangerous secret and was daring anyone to call him out. And as that moment stretched, the world suddenly had a new obsession. What exactly did Jonathan Bailey mean when he said he'd gotten close? Very close, with Meghan Markle? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's not jump ahead. To understand how one man's casual confession turned into a media firestorm, you have to go back, way back, to when the world first fell in love with Jonathan Bailey's disarming grin and Meghan Markle's royal rebellion. Because this isn't just a celebrity rumor. This is a collision between charm and controversy, truth and performance, and the quiet danger of saying too much when the cameras are still rolling. Now, why does this story matter now? Because timing, as they say in both love and politics, is everything. Meghan Markle's carefully rebuilt Hollywood reputation was already hanging by a thread. Her Netflix series had been canceled. Her talk of new projects was shadowed by skepticism. She'd been trying to pivot, to reshape her narrative. Then, just as she was stepping back into the spotlight, Jonathan Bailey stepped right in front of it. Jimmy Fallon's Tonight Show is usually a playground. Guests laugh, tease, play games, promote their projects. It's late-night comfort food. But this episode was different. Viewers said the air felt strange, like everyone sensed something off. The laughter felt nervous. Even the band slowed their rhythm when Jonathan started speaking about fame, honesty, and how sometimes people wear masks to survive. Even people you think you know, he said, looking straight into the audience. Sometimes they surprise you. Fallon chuckled awkwardly, leaned forward, and asked if he was referring to someone specific. That's when Jonathan smirked and uttered the name that no one expected. Imagine that. The same Meghan Markle who spent years fighting to control her image, her narrative, suddenly thrown into chaos by a man whose charm had made him a household name. And what makes this moment so electric is not just what Jonathan said, but how he said it. There was no malice, no bitterness, just the soft shock of someone revealing a truth they'd been carrying too long. Let's rewind to who Jonathan Bailey really is. To many, he's the perfect gentleman, witty, humble, the romantic lead who made millions swoon in Bridgerton. A man of grace and mystery. The kind of star whose interviews are clean, whose answers are practiced, and whose private life stays just that, private. Until that night. That's what made his confession so staggering. Because Jonathan Bailey was not the type to stir drama. He wasn't desperate for headlines. So why now? Why the story? And why Meghan? To find the answer, we have to trace the invisible thread that connects them. A thread that began long before Meghan became the Duchess of Sussex. London, 2014. She was still on Suits, visiting Britain often, networking with industry insiders, attending charity galas, and slipping quietly into the same social circles where actors like Jonathan gathered. London's entertainment elite isn't as vast as people think. Everyone knows everyone. Rumors whisper through private clubs, Soho House lounges, and film after-parties. Back then, Meghan was ambitious, curious, eager to climb. Jonathan was respected, not yet global, but admired by the right people. According to those who remember those nights, their paths crossed more than once. Fast forward to years later. Meghan's life takes a fairy tale turn. She marries Prince Harry, leaves acting behind, becomes a royal, then an exile, then a brand. Jonathan's career explodes. He wins awards, covers magazines, becomes the face of romantic perfection. Their worlds couldn't seem more different, until The Tonight Show blurred the line. Fallon, ever the entertainer, had started the segment playfully. "Congratulations on being named the espounciest man alive," he'd said, holding up the magazine cover. The audience cheered. Jonathan laughed, modest as always. Then Jimmy asked if he'd ever met any real royals. It was a throwaway question, or so everyone thought. But Jonathan's smile faltered, just for a heartbeat. The cameras caught it. Yeah, he said quietly. You could say that. The crowd laughed, assuming he was joking. Fallon laughed too. Wait. Are you saying you've met Meghan Markle? Jonathan hesitated, looked down, then nodded slightly. Met her? Yes, he said. Got to know her a little too well. There it was. 6 words that detonated across the internet like a bomb. Got to know her a little too well. In less than a minute, Twitter was on fire. TikTok exploded with slowed replays, lip-read analyses, micro-expressions, and fan theories. Within hours, the clip hit millions of views. But what most people didn't notice was what happened next, the panic behind the scenes. Jimmy Fallon's producers reportedly cut to commercial earlier than planned. When the show returned, the tone was lighter, scripted, rushed. Jonathan seemed calm, but Fallon's energy had shifted. Something unsaid lingered. And that's the beauty and terror of live television. You can't unsay what's been said. The next morning, the tabloids feasted. The Daily Mail called it Jonathan's midnight bombshell. Page 6 speculated about a pre-royal rendezvous. Some dismissed it as a slip. Others swore it sounded too deliberate. Fans dug through archives, finding old photos of Meghan at industry events where Jonathan had also appeared. A grainy picture from a charity gala suddenly resurfaced. 2 blurred figures in the background. Possibly them. Possibly coincidence. But the internet doesn't care about maybes. It cares about mystery. Still, why did Jonathan speak now? That's what everyone's asking. Why break years of silence over something that, if true, could damage not just Meghan but himself? Some believe it was spontaneous, that his honesty just slipped through the cracks of late-night comfort. Others whisper it was calculated, a quiet rebellion against Hollywood's manufactured secrecy. After all, Jonathan's recent interviews hinted at exhaustion with image control. I think authenticity scares people, he said in a GQ profile weeks before the Fallon show. Because when someone stops pretending, others lose their power over them. Did he mean Meghan? Or himself? Either way, his words opened a wound the world didn't know was still bleeding. Meghan Markle had spent years rebuilding her public identity, philanthropist, mother, advocate. To hear someone as adored as Jonathan Bailey imply an intimate past with her was more than scandal. It was erosion. It stripped away her carefully constructed distance from the Hollywood she left behind. But before we crown Jonathan the accidental whistleblower, remember this. Every story has 2 sides, and Meghan's side has always been fiercely guarded. Sources close to her allegedly called the claim ludicrous. Yet, their silence on legal action only made it worse. No lawsuits. No direct denials. Just controlled dismissal. The kind of response you give when you're told not to pour gasoline on a fire. And there's something else. Days before The Tonight Show aired, Meghan had reportedly been pitching a new Netflix project, a romantic docu-series exploring modern love. Insiders said the timing couldn't be worse. Overnight, Jonathan's words hijacked her narrative. Hollywood meetings got canceled. Publicists scrambled. The same networks she was courting started asking uncomfortable questions. Was this coincidence? Or karma? You can almost imagine the tension in her Montecito mansion that night. Phones lighting up, advisors pacing, Harry bewildered, perhaps even furious. How do you fight a rumor that comes wrapped in charm and broadcast to millions? How do you silence someone who doesn't seem afraid anymore? Because Jonathan didn't hide afterward. He didn't apologize. He went quiet, but not evasive. When paparazzi caught him days later outside a Broadway event, he smiled politely and said, "Sometimes honesty is its own headline. Simple, controlled, devastating. So where does that leave us? Somewhere between fact and performance, truth and temptation. Because at the heart of this story lies a question too powerful to ignore. What really happened between Jonathan Bailey and Meghan Markle before she wore a crown? And what did he mean when he said he got intimate? Intimate doesn't always mean physical, or does it? Could it have been emotional? Spiritual? A shared secret? Or was it exactly what the word implies? Something real, human, forbidden? Fallon's viewers caught it. The hesitation, the weighted silence after that word. Jonathan didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The pause said everything. And that's what makes this more than gossip. It's theater. It's human contradiction playing out in real time. A man known for elegance revealing something raw. A woman known for control suddenly losing grip of her story again. And somewhere between them, a world eager for the next chapter. Because as that episode ended, as Jimmy Fallon awkwardly transitioned to a musical guest and the credits rolled, there was one image burned into the minds of millions. Jonathan Bailey, looking straight into the camera with a faint, knowing smile. It was almost as if he wanted the world to wonder. As if this wasn't a slip at all, but a message. But a message for who? Meghan? Harry? The industry that rewards silence? Or the millions who still believe fame and truth can coexist? Whatever the reason, one thing is clear. That smile marked the end of Jonathan Bailey's quiet era and the beginning of a storm that would drag two worlds, Hollywood and royalty, into collision. Because moments after the cameras stopped rolling, The Tonight Show's backstage reportedly erupted. Calls went out. Producers panicked. One staffer later whispered to the press, "We thought we'd have to cut the segment." But it was live. It was already everywhere. Meghan's PR team allegedly called NBC executives within hours. But the clip was unstoppable. By sunrise, it had gone viral in 23 countries. And that's where our story truly begins. Not with the confession itself, but with what happened after. Because that one sentence didn't just expose a secret. It exposed an entire system of control built on fear, fame, and selective truth. Jonathan Bailey had cracked the mirror, and now everyone was staring at the reflection. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started like any other Tonight Show taping. Studio 6B was buzzing, laughter echoing through the bright walls of Rockefeller Center. Jimmy Fallon was at his peak energy, bouncing in his chair as he teased what the audience thought would be another lighthearted interview. The crowd was filled with fans clutching their phones, eager to record a moment with the man the world had just named the SHAMELESS man alive. Jonathan Bailey, dashing, polite, the kind of star who made you believe in decency again, was supposed to be there to promote his new romantic film. No one, not even the producers, had the faintest clue they were about to witness the most explosive moment of his career. The segment began with the usual rhythm, Jimmy cracking jokes, Jonathan laughing warmly, the audience eating up every second. But beneath the charm and lights, something felt off. Maybe it was Jonathan's body language. He wasn't tense, exactly, but there was a flicker, a kind of restless energy that didn't belong to a man simply promoting a film. It was subtle, the way his smile tightened whenever Jimmy mentioned fame, or when he jokingly brought up how every magazine in the country was calling him the modern Mr. Darcy. Then came the question. It wasn't planned, not really. Fallon loved spontaneity. That's what made him great at his job. But this time, that instinct would backfire in a way he could never have imagined. Between banter and applause, Jimmy leaned in with that signature grin and asked, "Have you ever met any real royals? You've got that Bridgerton charm. You could have fooled the Queen herself." The crowd laughed. Jonathan didn't. He tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing as if remembering something. Then, with a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes, he said softly, "I might have met someone royal. Once." It was barely a whisper, but the entire room went still. Jimmy, caught off guard, pressed on playfully. "Wait, are you saying you've met Meghan Markle?" Jonathan exhaled, his hands clasping together on his lap. "Met her?" "Yes," he said, voice measured. "Got to know her, maybe a little too well." The silence that followed was electric. For a moment, no one knew whether to laugh or gasp. Fallon's eyebrows shot up, his grin faltering as the audience rippled with confused chuckles. It was the kind of line that could be mistaken for humor, if only Jonathan hadn't said it so seriously. The cameras caught the tension perfectly, his jaw tightening, his eyes glancing briefly off camera as though realizing what he'd just unleashed. Jimmy tried to rescue the moment. "Oh, come on now. You mean like, you met her at one of those fancy London events, right?" Jonathan's lips curved into a polite smile. "Something like that," he replied, his tone calm but weighted, deliberate. And just like that, the energy in the room shifted from entertainment to unease. Somewhere in the control room, a producer muttered, "Cut to commercial." But Fallon was already in too deep. The audience, unsure of whether they'd witnessed a joke or a revelation, clapped awkwardly as Jimmy forced out a laugh. "Well, I guess we're not getting invited to any royal tea parties now," he said. The music kicked in. Commercial break. The cameras faded out. But inside that studio, chaos erupted. According to an audience member who later spoke anonymously, the moment the red light on the camera dimmed, Jimmy's expression changed. He leaned toward Jonathan and whispered something that made Bailey laugh nervously. A producer rushed over, gesturing toward the stage manager. There were whispers, hand signals, frantic murmurs. And Jonathan? He just sat back in his chair, perfectly calm, sipping from his water bottle as if nothing had happened. It was surreal, the kind of stillness that only exists before a storm. The show returned from commercial, but the rhythm was gone. Fallon's energy had flattened. Jonathan smiled and answered a few surface questions about his film, but something in his tone had changed, heavier, reflective. When the segment ended, the applause sounded forced, the laughter hollow. The moment the cameras stopped rolling for good, Jimmy exhaled and muttered under his breath, "Well, that's one for the books." And oh, it was. Because by the time the audience spilled out of Studio 6B and onto the New York streets, the internet had already exploded. A few audience members had caught the line on their phones before the commercial cut, uploading it to TikTok, Instagram, and X. Within minutes, hashtags like #JonathanBailey and #Meghan Confession were trending worldwide. People replayed the 6-second clip, dissecting every word, every breath, every blink. Got to know her. Maybe a little too well. Was it sarcasm, flirtation, or confession? The ambiguity was deadly, the perfect fuel for public speculation. And for Meghan Markle, who'd spent years crafting her post-royal image, those 6 words were like a torpedo fired straight at the hull. Inside NBC's offices, phones started ringing before the show even finished airing on the West Coast. Executives scrambled. One insider claimed Fallon's team received direct calls from Meghan's representatives requesting the segment be edited out of online uploads. But it was too late. The raw broadcast had already aired live in multiple time zones, and the internet never forgets. The next morning, tabloids went nuclear. Headlines screamed across screens. Jonathan Bailey's bombshell. Secret past with Meghan Markle? Fallon floored by Bridgerton star's royal slip. Hollywood's gentleman or Meghan's hidden flame? Some tabloids went further, hinting that the confession wasn't a joke at all, that it was connected to an old rumor buried years before Meghan's royal days. But what most people missed in the frenzy was Jonathan's demeanor after the show. He didn't hide. He didn't issue a denial. He didn't even call it a joke. When paparazzi caught up to him leaving his Manhattan hotel, he smiled politely and said only, "People will believe what they want to believe. I just told the truth." That line became gasoline on the fire. The truth? What truth? What was he implying? Meanwhile, Meghan's world was spiraling behind the curtain. Her PR team reportedly called an emergency meeting. Lawyers were consulted. Palace insiders whispered that Prince Harry was furious, not just at Jonathan, but at Meghan for not warning him that something like this could ever surface. How could she have known? And yet, the question lingered. What exactly was Jonathan referring to? Now here's the thing about timing. It's rarely accidental in Hollywood. Only days before that interview, Jonathan had been photographed leaving a meeting with a prominent talk show producer. Insiders speculated he was preparing a press tour for his new romantic film, a movie, ironically, about secrets between lovers. Was that coincidence? Or careful marketing gone too far? Some industry voices suggested he was provoked, that Jimmy's question caught him off guard and emotion slipped through. But others, the ones who know how media cycles work, whispered that Jonathan's confession was deliberate, that he'd carried the story for years and was finally ready to set it free. And if that's true, it makes sense why his tone wasn't playful. It wasn't defensive. It was weary, like someone who'd lived with a truth too long and finally stopped caring about the fallout. In the hours that followed, Fallon's team cut the replay clip from NBC's official YouTube upload, trimming out the Got to Know Her segment entirely. But fans noticed. They flooded the comments. Where's the Meghan part? They edited it out, cover up much. Within 48 hours, the missing footage became more famous than the episode itself. Then came the leaks. A studio staffer reportedly told Entertainment Weekly that Fallon was visibly shaken during the commercial break and demanded the control booth mute that segment for replays. Another claimed that Meghan's PR representative reached out directly to Fallon's producer within the hour, threatening legal review. The message was clear. This wasn't going to be dismissed as harmless banter. Meanwhile, social media split in two. Half the internet believed Jonathan was telling the truth, that he and Meghan shared something real before she ever met Prince Harry. The other half dismissed it as another case of fame-fueled rumor-mongering. Yet, somewhere in between those extremes sat the undeniable. Jonathan Bailey had said those words on national television without a hint of hesitation, and that made it real enough. What's fascinating about that night isn't just the confession itself, but how calm Jonathan remained afterward. No publicist statements, no frantic explanations, no late-night tweets trying to clarify context. Instead, he disappeared from social media entirely. No Instagram updates, no tweets, just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any denial could have. Because when people lie, they usually rush to fix the narrative. When they tell the truth, they let the chaos speak for them. Within 3 days, every major entertainment outlet had joined the hunt. Old archives were reopened. Photos, guest lists, event records from pre-royal Meghan days were dredged up. And that's when something curious happened. A resurfaced image from a 2014 charity gala in London. A dimly lit shot, 2 figures laughing near the bar, one unmistakably Jonathan Bailey, the other resembling Meghan Markle. Not definitive proof, but enough to reignite the fire. As one gossip columnist put it, the photo might be blurry, but the chemistry isn't. Meghan's lawyers quickly dismissed it as fabricated speculation, yet refused to confirm whether the two had ever met. And that refusal, that cautious phrasing, became the heart of the story. Because if it wasn't true, why not say so outright? Why not call it false and move on? Instead, her silence became another headline. And through it all, Jonathan never flinched. Sources close to him said he laughed when friends texted him links to the frenzy. "It's just truth catching up," he reportedly told one colleague. Simple words, but dangerous ones. Because truth, when left alone, tends to grow teeth. Behind closed doors, NBC executives debated whether to publicly address the incident. Fallon, according to insiders, was torn between embarrassment and fascination. He reportedly said, "It's the most viral thing we've had in months, and I can't even rerun it." By week's end, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Think pieces questioned whether Meghan's Hollywood past would come back to haunt her. Others debated whether Jonathan's honesty was refreshing or reckless. But what everyone agreed on was this. That night on The Tonight Show had permanently changed the perception of both. Jonathan Bailey was no longer just the gentleman actor. He was now the man who looked the world in the eye and said something too explosive to be contained. Meghan Markle, once the master of her narrative, found herself cornered by a past she thought she'd left behind. And yet, despite the frenzy, no one knew the most important part. What exactly happened between them all those years ago? Because if Jonathan Bailey's confession was only the spark, the firestorm that followed would reveal far more. Old secrets, hidden encounters, and the blurred lines between love, ambition, and survival. As one industry insider put it, that night didn't just expose a rumor. It exposed how powerful Meghan really isn't anymore. But what no one realized then, not Fallon, not Meghan, not even Jonathan, was that the real explosion was still to come. Because buried beneath the gossip, the headlines, and the memes was something darker, something that had been hidden for nearly a decade. And when that truth surfaced, it wouldn't just rewrite a late-night interview. It would rewrite their entire past. Because this wasn't the first time Jonathan Bailey and Meghan Markle had crossed paths, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. But what came next would make that Tonight Show moment look tame. And no one, not even Jonathan, was ready for it. Before the Tonight Show storm, before the headlines and whispers, Jonathan Bailey was the man Hollywood adored for all the right reasons. Clean reputation, controlled demeanor, the rare celebrity who seemed untouchable and uninterested in the games everyone else played. To understand why his words hit like a thunderclap, you have to understand who Jonathan Bailey is. Not the magazine cover heartthrob, not the suave Viscount Anthony Bridgerton, but the man who spent most of his life avoiding exactly the kind of chaos that erupted that night. Because if there's one thing Jonathan valued more than fame, it was privacy. And for years, he protected it like a fortress. He grew up far from the Hollywood glare, in a small English town, the youngest of 4 siblings. Friends described him as curious, grounded, and deeply empathetic. He wasn't born into privilege. He built his way up, one theater audition at a time. His teachers remembered him as the boy who could disappear into any role, who treated acting like truth-telling. That's what made him different. For Jonathan, performance wasn't about fame. It was about revelation. Ironically, that same drive to reveal truth on screen would one day make it impossible for him to hide it in real life. Long before Bridgerton turned him into a global fantasy, Jonathan had already earned quiet respect in British theater circles. He was disciplined, hardworking, the kind of actor directors fought to cast because he brought sincerity to every line. He was also famously polite, the type who sent handwritten thank you notes and remembered every stagehand's name. Yet behind the politeness was intensity, a depth people felt but couldn't fully explain. When Bridgerton launched, Jonathan became something more than a working actor. He became a symbol. The world fell in love with his smoldering gaze, his elegance, his ability to turn desire into poetry. Fans called him the gentleman we thought didn't exist anymore. Every interview reinforced that image. He spoke with humility, gratitude, and charm. No scandals, no feuds, no public breakdowns. Until that one sentence changed everything. But to truly understand why his confession hit so hard, you have to look at what he'd been carrying long before Jimmy Fallon said the word royal. You see, fame doesn't erase the past, it magnifies it. For years, Jonathan had danced gracefully around personal questions. Interviewers who dared to ask about his dating life got vague smiles and quick pivots. "I try to keep my private life private," he'd say, always with that disarming calm that made you forget you'd just been redirected. Yet there were clues, small, fleeting moments when the mask slipped. In one 2019 interview, when asked if fame ever tempted him into dangerous company, he paused for a second too long before laughing it off. "Let's just say the entertainment world introduces you to interesting people." The interviewer moved on, not realizing he'd just brushed against something real. It wasn't until years later that people began revisiting those moments, trying to decode them in light of his Tonight Show revelation. Who were these interesting people? Was Meghan among them? Jonathan's inner circle is famously tight. Friends say he's loyal to a fault. Once you're in for life. But if you cross him, he simply erases you. No public drama, no confrontation, just quiet, permanent distance. That's why those who know him best weren't shocked by what happened that night. They say Jonathan had been sitting on something for a long time, that he'd hinted privately at knowing someone who became untouchable, someone whose name he swore never to repeat. And then one night, under studio lights, he finally did. But let's step back. When Jonathan first met Meghan Markle, she wasn't royalty. She wasn't even a household name outside of the Suits fandom. She was an actress in transition, trying to build her presence in the UK, chasing bigger projects, attending elite gatherings to network. Jonathan, already known in British theater, moved in those same social circles. They were both charming, ambitious, photogenic, and curious about each other. A producer who attended one of those gatherings years ago recalled seeing them talking for an unusually long time. "It wasn't flirtatious," she said, "but there was undeniable chemistry, a shared energy, an intensity of conversation that made people take notice." Meghan was fascinated by the London theater scene. Jonathan was curious about Hollywood's machinery. Two worlds colliding for the first time. After that night, they were spotted a few times at the same events, a film gala here, a charity dinner there. Always casual, always within groups. But those who were there swear there was an undertone, a familiarity that grew with each meeting. Not scandalous, just intimate. The kind of intimacy that doesn't need to be physical to be dangerous. And maybe that's what Jonathan meant all those years later when he said, "Got to know her a little too well." Because there are kinds of intimacy that go deeper than touch, the kind where two people recognize something in each other they'd rather not admit. For Jonathan, it may have been admiration. For Meghan, perhaps curiosity. They were both climbers, not in the cynical sense, but in the human sense, drawn toward light, ambition, recognition. They mirrored each other's hunger. And mirrors, if stared at too long, can become dangerous. By 2016, Meghan's trajectory changed overnight. She met Prince Harry, and the rest became royal history. Whatever connection she and Jonathan had, real, emotional, or otherwise, vanished into silence. He never mentioned her name again, not even once. until Fallon's stage ripped open that sealed vault. And the strangest part? Jonathan didn't seem angry when he spoke. He didn't look vindictive or regretful. He looked relieved. One close friend told a reporter afterward, "Jonathan's the kind of person who carries truth like a weight. He can pretend for a while, but eventually it leaks out." That night, it finally did. It's not that Jonathan wanted to humiliate anyone. Those who know him say the opposite. That his confession wasn't about revenge. It was about honesty, about finally being done with the facade that fame forces you to maintain. Think about it. Jonathan had spent years playing fictional romances, perfect love stories, clean-cut fantasies. Maybe that night, he decided to reveal the Messier version of real life, the part Hollywood hides and PR destroys. Maybe he just stopped caring who it hurt, because for once, he wasn't playing a role. That's the irony of it all. The man famous for portraying fictional passion revealed something true, and the world called it scandal. When asked later by a fan at a Broadway stage door whether he regretted saying what he did, Jonathan smiled and said, "I don't regret truth. I regret timing." Timing. The word echoed like prophecy. Because his truth didn't just spill, it detonated at the precise moment Meghan could least afford it. Hollywood insiders noticed the coincidence. Meghan's rebranding campaign had been in full swing. Interviews, new projects, strategic appearances. Her name was climbing back up the sympathy charts. Then came Jonathan's 6 words, and everything she'd built began to wobble again. That's the thing about Jonathan. He never needs to shout to be heard. His power is in subtlety. The same restraint that makes him mesmerizing on screen makes his real-life confessions cut even deeper. When he finally speaks, people listen, because he's not known for talking carelessly. In a world of oversharing celebrities, Jonathan Bailey was the quiet storm, and that night, he finally thundered. But what few people knew then is that Jonathan's connection to Meghan went beyond personal curiosity. There were layers to their story, professional, emotional, even coincidental. Their paths kept crossing, even when they pretended they hadn't. In 2015, Meghan guest hosted a small charity gala for the arts in London. Among the attendees, Jonathan Bailey, performing a monologue from Shakespeare. There's footage from that night, grainy, handheld, showing Meghan applauding from the front row. You can see her smile when Jonathan bows. You can see him glance toward her, briefly, just a second, but enough for those who know body language to call it loaded. Coincidence? Maybe. But if it was, it's one of many coincidences that form a pattern. Even their interviews seem to echo each other over the years. Meghan, in a 2016 lifestyle podcast, spoke about connecting deeply with someone you're not supposed to. Jonathan, in a 2017 interview, said he once walked away from someone because timing made honesty impossible. At the time, no one connected the dots. Now, people can't help but wonder. So when Jonathan finally said those words on Fallon's couch, it wasn't a random explosion. It was the slow release of a truth that had been swelling beneath the surface for nearly a decade. The man who'd built his career on restraint finally broke it. And the world saw a glimpse of something rare, vulnerability without performance. But here's where it gets more complicated. Because even as Jonathan faced the tidal wave of attention, he never lashed out. He never explained. Which made people wonder, was he protecting her? Or protecting himself? Because if his relationship with Meghan, whatever it was, went beyond innocent friendship, admitting it would do more than just bruise reputations. It could reshape royal narratives. It could rewrite timelines. And that's when the speculation began to turn dangerous. Suddenly, people weren't just gossiping. They were investigating. Reporters started digging into archives, event logs, private social media accounts. A rumor surfaced that an old assistant of Meghan's once saw a message exchange between her and a Jonathan B. Brief, affectionate, but unmistakably personal. Of course, that claim was denied instantly. But in the world of celebrity truth, denial often sounds like confirmation. Through it all, Jonathan stayed silent. The same silence that made him mysterious in the first place. But silence, once again, only fuels the story. Because every time he refuses to clarify, people fill in the blanks. And maybe that's exactly what he wants. He's the kind of man who understands performance better than anyone. The way mystery keeps people hooked, the way restraint amplifies desire. Maybe his confession wasn't an accident. Maybe it was an invitation. Because what's more intoxicating than a story half told? But if Jonathan Bailey thought he could control the storm, he was wrong. Because once Meghan's name entered the narrative, control vanished. The palace noticed. The press sharpened their claws. And Meghan, the woman who'd spent years silencing old ghosts, realized one had just started speaking. Jonathan's reputation might have survived the night, but his peace would not, nor would Meghan's. Because the truth about what really connected them wasn't buried in interviews or photos. It was buried in a night no one knew about, one that predated crowns, cameras, and controversy. A night Jonathan thought he'd never have to remember again. But soon, the world would remember it for him. Because that London encounter, the one everyone thought was harmless, was anything but. And what happened there would unravel everything we thought we knew about both of them. London has a way of hiding secrets in plain sight. The city thrums with life, black cabs weaving through rain-slicked streets, red buses rattling along cobblestone lanes, the hum of theater marquees echoing into the night. It's beautiful, chaotic, intoxicating. And somewhere amid that bustle, two people crossed paths in a way the world would only notice years later. Jonathan Bailey and Meghan Markle. It wasn't glamorous at first glance. No red carpet. No paparazzi flashbulbs. Just the soft glow of a Soho House lounge, a dimly lit room crowded with actors, producers, and London socialites. It was the kind of event designed to look casual, but engineered to impress, networking disguised as leisure. Meghan, elegant in a black satin blouse and tailored trousers, sipped her champagne with the effortless poise she would later bring to the royal stage. Jonathan, in a simple but impeccably cut navy suit, leaned against a column, observing, listening, calculating. Their first encounter was, on the surface, ordinary. A brief introduction, polite smiles, the exchange of names and roles. But those who saw it swear there was an undercurrent, a subtle magnetism neither could ignore. They laughed at the same jokes, leaned toward each other during conversations, and carried a spark in their eyes that didn't extend to anyone else in the room. Insiders say Meghan had a habit of studying people the way actors study scripts, noting timing, inflection, microexpressions. Jonathan, known for his attention to detail on stage, did the same. They were mirrors of each other, reflections of ambition, charm, and curiosity. One attendee later described the scene. They didn't talk loudly. They didn't need to. But you could feel it. The air shifted whenever they were near. People noticed without knowing why. It wasn't a flirtation in the obvious sense. There were no overt gestures, no secret handshakes, no private rooms. It was something far more dangerous: connection. Mutual recognition. Two ambitious souls acknowledging, silently, that they understood each other in ways most others couldn't. And in London, such moments are precious because they are fleeting. The city itself encourages movement, change, transformation. One week you're a theater actor in a minor production. The next, you're a global sensation. One dinner can alter trajectories. One conversation can ignite fascination. And that night, it did. Jonathan was polite, careful, measured, the kind of man who never gave more than necessary. But there were cracks, small ones. A lingering glance, a subtle tilt of his head, a smile held just a fraction too long. Meghan, equally skilled at concealment, mirrored his behavior, though with a slight mischievous edge. There was an unspoken understanding. Some truths didn't need to be voiced aloud. They spoke of ambition, of Hollywood dreams, of theater and film. Jonathan recounted tales of performing Shakespeare for audiences that barely appreciated it. Meghan spoke about transitioning from television to film, about the delicate art of building a personal brand without losing oneself. They laughed at each other's frustrations, offering insight and encouragement. It was intimate in its own way, not physical, but intellectual, emotional, the kind of intimacy that lingers longer than any casual encounter. Some called it friendship. Others, in hindsight, see it as something more. Because even then, in that crowded room, the tension was palpable. After the official event ended, they lingered near the bar, talking quietly. Champagne glasses emptied. Waiters passed by with trays of canapés. No one noticed them, or pretended not to. It was private in a public space, a secret hidden beneath the facade of ordinary interactions. Jonathan's friends later admitted they suspected he was smitten, not with Meghan's fame or her beauty, but with her presence, her intellect, her ability to make him feel both challenged and understood. Meghan, for her part, reportedly enjoyed the candid conversation, someone who didn't play the games, someone who could speak honestly without fear of repercussion. After that night, their paths continued to cross. A charity gala here, a film premiere there, occasional lunches that seemed accidental but were anything but. Friends on both sides noticed subtle shifts, quiet exchanges of messages, glances across rooms, fleeting moments that suggested familiarity beyond casual acquaintance. But then, life intervened. Meghan met Prince Harry. The world changed overnight. Jonathan's trajectory skyrocketed with Bridgerton, and the careful, delicate intimacy they shared, intellectual, emotional, ephemeral, became memory. The past, they both assumed, was safely buried. Or so they thought. Fast forward years later, and Jonathan Bailey, standing on the Tonight Show stage, smiled faintly when asked about royalty. He didn't elaborate. He didn't explain. He simply allowed the 6 words, "got to know her," maybe a little too well, to linger in the air, and in doing so, he revived every speculation about that London encounter. The magic of that night in Soho House wasn't in what they did. It was in the potential it carried, the intimacy, the connection, the spark of something forbidden. And when Jonathan referenced it publicly, the entire world suddenly wanted to know what had been hidden for nearly a decade. Insiders later revealed that even the Tonight Show audience felt the weight of that moment. Gasps, murmurs, and uncomfortable laughter punctuated Jonathan's words. People replayed the scene on their phones, debating whether he was joking, serious, or perhaps testing the waters. And Fallon himself reportedly whispered to his team, "Did he just say what I think he said?" Because the truth is, in London, that evening had been subtle, almost invisible to anyone not paying close attention. But subtlety has a way of becoming explosive when revealed to the wrong audience. And live television, with millions watching, is the perfect place for that. Yet, the story doesn't end there. That night planted seeds, seeds that would grow into rumors, speculation, and eventually, headlines. Because the encounter wasn't merely a moment in time. It was a foundation for misunderstanding, curiosity, and eventual revelation. The chemistry, the unspoken understanding, the mutual recognition, all of it became a narrative waiting to be exploited. Even now, when people recount the Soho House encounter, there's an undeniable tension. Was it friendship? Attraction? Something more profound? The ambiguity is what makes it dangerous. In Hollywood and royalty, ambiguity can be weaponized. One hint, one phrase, one smile, and suddenly, the world is invested. And that's exactly what happened when Jonathan finally spoke those words on Fallon's stage. The audience didn't just hear them. They felt them. They imagined the dimly lit lounge, the champagne glasses, the whispered conversations. They imagined the private glances and the unspoken acknowledgement of connection. And because of that imagination, the story exploded. For Meghan Markle, this meant sudden exposure. For Jonathan Bailey, it meant stepping into a storm he hadn't entirely anticipated. Their London encounter, once private, had become a public obsession. Every gesture, every smile, every comment from years ago was dissected, analyzed, and broadcast to millions. And yet, what made the night truly unforgettable wasn't just the encounter itself. It was the potential it represented, a door into a world neither of them could have imagined at the time. A door that, once opened on Fallon's stage, could never be closed again. Because intimacy, even the quietest, most intellectual kind, leaves a trace. And that trace, once revealed, becomes irresistible. As the Tonight Show segment ended, Jonathan walked off stage, calm, collected, but something had shifted. The London encounter, the one nobody outside of that lounge would ever know, had suddenly taken on global significance. What was private had become public. What was subtle had become explosive. And for Meghan, for Jonathan, for everyone watching, it was only the beginning. Because if you think a single encounter in London is just a footnote in a life lived under scrutiny, think again. Because that night planted the seeds for a story that would engulf 2 worlds, Hollywood and royalty, in a way no one expected. And what happened next would reveal not only the depth of their connection, but the consequences of crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Hollywood is a world built on appearances, on carefully constructed images that glimmer on magazine covers, but often crumble behind closed doors. It thrives on rumors, whispered encounters, and fleeting connections that the public mistakes for scandal. And in this world, one tiny spark, one discreet encounter, can ignite a firestorm that no one, not even the most polished celebrity, can control. For Jonathan Bailey and Meghan Markle, the spark was subtle. It wasn't on a red carpet, not in front of screaming fans, but in quiet dinners, private galas, and late-night charity events. People saw them together, yes, but rarely alone, rarely in a moment that could be captured as proof. Hollywood insiders, however, noticed patterns. The shared glances, the quiet smiles, the fleeting interactions that carried a different energy than what was seen on camera. Rumors began to circulate, soft at first, whispered over wine in private lounges, then gradually reaching blogs, tabloids, and eventually, fan forums. Hollywood loves a secret. It fuels gossip columns and social media speculation. In the case of Jonathan and Meghan, those who worked in the industry swore they had seen something unusual, a connection that went beyond professional courtesy. It wasn't the typical celebrity flirtation, the kind that can be shrugged off in interviews. There was tension, yes, but also a remarkable understanding. Insiders described it as magnetic but unspoken, the type of chemistry that doesn't need physical confirmation to be noticed. One Hollywood publicist who had worked with Jonathan described the early whispers. People would see them at events and ask, "Who's that with him?" Jonathan would just smile and say nothing. Meghan would nod politely, as if nothing was happening. But the truth? Everyone who paid attention could feel it. It was obvious they had a bond. By 2015, the whispers had begun to solidify into rumors. Blogs speculated about late-night meetings, cryptic social media posts, and coincidental appearances at the same charity events. There were no photos, nothing concrete, but Hollywood thrives on intrigue, and intrigue is often more powerful than fact. The rumors painted a picture of intimacy that was never confirmed, yet never denied, either. For Jonathan, the rumors were both flattering and dangerous. As the S-bounciest man alive in the making, he had everything to lose. His career depended on charm, professionalism, and an untarnished reputation. Yet every whispered conversation in Hollywood, every raised eyebrow in a private party, reminded him of the connection he shared with Meghan, a connection he had vowed to keep private. Meghan, for her part, was rising quickly through the entertainment ranks. She was ambitious, focused, and determined to craft a career on her terms. Any hint of a secret affair, real or imagined, could derail her trajectory. But she, too, had been intrigued by Jonathan. Their conversations had been electric, a rare meeting of minds and personalities. Some insiders described it as a collision of equals, where admiration and attraction intertwined seamlessly. Hollywood loves contradictions, and the contradiction in their relationship was irresistible. Here was Jonathan, the polite, disciplined actor who never sought scandal, paired in rumor with Meghan, a rising star who would later navigate the pressures of royal life. The contrast was perfect fodder for gossip. Discipline meets glamour, privacy meets ambition, subtlety meets curiosity. By 2016, Hollywood's rumor mills were working overtime. Publications hinted at late-night encounters, networking dinners, and unexplained chemistry at events where Jonathan and Meghan appeared together. A handful of tabloids ran anonymous tips. "Sources say there's more between them than meets the eye," one headline claimed. Another quietly suggested, "There's a shared history they've both tried to keep hidden." Jonathan, aware of the rumors, maintained his carefully constructed public persona. Interviews were polite, vague, evasive, never dismissive, but never confirming anything, either. Meghan, similarly, remained focused on her career, her projects, and eventually her royal duties. Both understood the power of silence. In Hollywood, silence can be protective, but it can also be combustible. Insiders reported that their private exchanges continued, albeit discreetly. Messages, meetings, and dinners were arranged with careful consideration, always in public-facing contexts that provided plausible deniability. Yet every interaction, every glance, fed speculation. The story of Jonathan and Meghan became a Hollywood legend of sorts, a secret affair whispered about in back corridors, a narrative too tantalizing to ignore, yet impossible to verify. It wasn't just fans and gossip columns that noticed. Executives, agents, and PR teams monitored their interactions closely. Some were concerned. A rumor involving someone of Meghan's caliber, especially as she moved toward Hollywood prominence and eventual royal visibility, could spiral uncontrollably. Jonathan, aware of the stakes, seemed almost detached, measured in his behavior, careful not to provide anything that could be seized upon as proof. Yet in public, in interviews and appearances, there was an unmistakable energy, the kind that suggests a shared understanding between two people who've crossed a line that most observers cannot define. By 2017, Meghan's life was changing dramatically. The meeting with Prince Harry had occurred. Her future as a duchess was imminent. Meanwhile, Jonathan's career soared with theater accolades and early hints of global fame. Their private connection faded into the background, buried beneath the weight of public roles and responsibilities. Yet, Hollywood's memory is long, and the rumors never entirely died. Industry insiders continued to speculate, debating whether Jonathan's charm had once been matched by something more secretive with Meghan. When Jonathan appeared on The Tonight Show years later, the whispers transformed into a headline-shattering confession. The careful secrecy of Hollywood rumors, years of speculation, half-glimpsed interactions, subtle glances at events, exploded into clarity. One sentence, uttered calmly on live television, made every whispered story suddenly plausible. Got to know her, maybe a little too well. Hollywood, of course, was electrified. Gossip columns, blogs, and social media feeds filled instantly with speculation. Every detail of their past encounters, every rumored dinner, every shared glance at Soho House or charity events was dissected frame by frame. Suddenly, decades of careful ambiguity had a new life, a new audience, and a new intensity. For Meghan, it was devastating. Her carefully curated post-royal persona, her work with Netflix, and her public image were suddenly overshadowed by a six-word revelation. Hollywood rumors, once harmless whispers, now had global consequences. Jonathan, who had always maintained his composure, had unwittingly, or perhaps deliberately, reignited a storm that neither he nor Meghan could fully control. The intrigue didn't end with Fallon's live confession. Weeks later, journalists and bloggers revisited old photos, event logs, and interviews, trying to piece together a timeline. Did a dinner in Los Angeles in 2015 signal something more? Was there a text exchange in 2016 that hinted at familiarity beyond professional courtesy? Could fleeting encounters at charity galas or theater premieres indicate a hidden affair? Every potential clue became ammunition for public curiosity. And yet, Jonathan Bailey remained composed. No public apology. No clarifying statement. Silence, once again, became his weapon. In Hollywood, controlling your narrative is everything, but sometimes, letting others fill in the gaps is even more powerful. And Jonathan had learned this early in his career. He understood that rumors, once fanned into the open, could take on lives of their own. He understood that ambiguity was magnetic. And he understood that revealing just enough, but never too much, could create the perfect storm. The storm arrived faster than anyone anticipated. Social media exploded. Fans and skeptics debated. Was this really an affair? Was it emotional intimacy? Was it something purely professional but misinterpreted? Every angle fueled engagement. Every opinion added heat to the fire. By the time the dust settled, Jonathan Bailey and Meghan Markle were at the center of one of Hollywood's most compelling modern legends. Yet even in the midst of the frenzy, the truth remained elusive. No one knew the depth of their connection, the nights spent talking privately, the subtle moments that had sparked rumors in the first place. Hollywood had always thrived on secrets, but now one secret had been exposed, and the world hungered for more. And that's where the next revelation waited. A dinner that would blur lines, ignite speculation, and leave an indelible mark on both of their lives. Because what happened at that dinner wasn't casual. It wasn't innocent. And it wasn't meant for the public eye. But what came next would push the rumors into reality. And no one, not even Jonathan, could predict the consequences that it started as an ordinary evening. London, 2015. A city that never truly sleeps, where the faint glow of street lamps reflects off rain-slicked pavement, and the murmur of private parties leaks through the cracks of grand doors. For most, it was another night of networking, another opportunity to charm and be seen. For Jonathan Bailey and Meghan Markle, it would become a turning point, a dinner that would ripple into years of rumor, speculation, and eventual revelation. The location was discreet, a private room in a renowned Soho restaurant known for attracting both Hollywood hopefuls and British stage royalty. Dim lighting, a soft murmur of classical music, and the smell of truffle risotto and aged wine set the stage. Candles flickered on each table, casting shadows that danced across the walls like silent spectators. No cameras, no audience. Just two people navigating the delicate balance between curiosity and restraint. Jonathan arrived first, dressed in a tailored navy suit, his posture relaxed but precise, the kind of presence that commands attention without demanding it. He took a corner seat, surveying the room, calculating every moment. Meghan arrived shortly after, elegant in a dark emerald blouse and black trousers, her hair cascading softly over her shoulders. She carried herself with effortless poise, but those who've seen her up close say there was a flicker of excitement in her eyes, a subtle acknowledgement that tonight would be different. The dinner began with polite conversation, small talk about mutual acquaintances, upcoming projects, and the state of London theatre. Jonathan's tone was warm, deliberate, each word chosen carefully, measured. Meghan's responses were equally precise, tinged with curiosity, her laughter light but genuine. But beneath the surface, both were testing boundaries, feeling the invisible tension that had been building for months. Observers who would later recall the event, friends, servers, and fellow diners, noted the subtle cues that spoke louder than words. A lingering glance across the table, fingers brushing momentarily as plates were passed, pauses in conversation that weren't awkward, but charged. These were the quiet signals of connection, the moments that the outside world would later label intimate, even if no one witnessing it would have understood why. As the evening progressed, the conversation deepened. Jonathan spoke about his theater experiences, the thrill of performing Shakespeare, the challenge of embodying someone else's life for an audience. Meghan shared insights from her acting career, her journey navigating the Hollywood machine, and her ambitions beyond the screen. They spoke of vulnerability and ambition, of the fine line between desire and discretion. Every word was carefully crafted, yet imbued with a weight that neither could fully hide. Then came the subtle shift, the moment that turned ordinary dinner into something far more significant. A joke, lightly teasing, was exchanged about celebrity crushes. Jonathan's smile lingered longer than necessary, his gaze briefly fixed on Meghan's. She responded with a smile that hinted at recognition, acknowledgement, a shared secret neither would admit aloud. For a split second, time seemed to slow. They weren't merely two actors at a dinner anymore. They were two people caught in a tension that felt both exhilarating and forbidden. After the main course, wine glasses were refilled, the music softened, and conversation moved toward personal reflections. Jonathan shared a story about a failed romance, his voice tinged with melancholy. Meghan listened intently, leaning slightly forward, her hand brushing the table near his. She shared her own experiences of heartbreak and ambition, the challenges of navigating public life while maintaining private dignity. Their dialogue was layered, part confessional, part intellectual sparring, part subtle flirtation. Somewhere in that room, the boundaries between friendship and something more began to blur. Neither acknowledged it directly, neither acted rashly, but the chemistry was undeniable, a charged energy that both thrilled and alarmed them. It was dangerous, in the sense that real connection often is, especially when both participants knew there were stakes far beyond personal curiosity. Jonathan's friends later reflected on the dinner with a mixture of awe and concern. They described him as radiating an unusual calm, but with a tension that suggested he knew something unprecedented was unfolding. Meghan, too, reportedly left the restaurant with a lingering sense of intrigue and unease, a recognition that what had begun as a casual dinner had crossed an invisible line. And yet, there was no scandal, no public acknowledgement. To the outside world, it was an ordinary meeting between acquaintances. But for those who were present, those subtle observers, the energy was palpable. In the days that followed, Both returned to their respective lives. Jonathan focused on theater rehearsals, interviews, and gradually preparing for his breakout role in Bridgerton. Meghan returned to her Hollywood projects, guest appearances, and social engagements. But the memory of that night lingered. Small, subtle things. A glance in a photograph, a message left unsent, a shared joke at a subsequent event, kept the connection alive in quiet, almost invisible ways. Hollywood gossip began to stir, as it always does. Friends, acquaintances, and insiders started piecing together patterns. Late-night dinners, mutual events, overlapping social circles. Rumors of a connection beyond friendship began circulating, whispered in private lounges and over champagne in exclusive clubs. None of it was public. None of it was confirmed. And yet, it was enough to lay the groundwork for a narrative that would explode years later.